Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to this LSE Middle East Centre event, Iranian Kurdistan under the Islamic Republic. We are delighted to be here this evening to be launching the book, and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for coming out here tonight. We have also some participants online. Welcome to you. Thank you for joining us as well. My name is Robert Lowe, and I'm the Deputy Director of the LSE Middle East Centre and also the co-convener of the Kurdish Studies series, which we host here at the LSE Middle East Centre. Tonight, we are delighted to have two distinguished speakers. They will speak together combined for a period of around half an hour, following which there'll be plenty of time for you, both in the room and online, to ask any questions or make any comments you wish. The event will be recorded, and we also aim to make a podcast of the event available later. We will also be taking photos during the event. If you're in the room, please be aware of that. You, I hope, will have seen a leaflet, the small leaflet on your chair for the book from Ivy Tauris. There's a 35% discount code there from the publisher, which we will also share online with our participants there if you wish to buy a copy of the book. Right, on with events. I am delighted and very honoured to welcome my colleague Marouf Cabi here tonight to present his new book. Marouf is a visiting fellow at the LSE Middle East Centre, has been for 2.5 years now, I think, and we're very proud to have him amongst our team. He received his PhD in history from the University of St Andrews. He is a social and cultural historian of modern Iran, and he has published in a number of academic journals and has also published his earlier monograph, which was the formation of modern Kurdish society in Iran from 1921 to 1979. So you can see he has now updated that story from 79 through to the present. Marouf has also taught Middle Eastern history at the University of St Andrews for several years. And then once Marouf has made his presentation, we're very pleased that our colleague Kamran Matin here will join us to say a few remarks in response to the discussion. Kamran is Reader in International Relations in the School of Global Studies at the University of Sussex, where he teaches international history, international theory, and Middle East politics. Amongst many publications, he is the author of Recasting Iranian Modernity, which is a 2013 book, and he's published many articles and op-eds on Kurdish politics. Also, Cameron, in addition, co-edits Palgrave's series on minorities in West Asia and North Africa. So a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Marouf, over to you. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing more about your book. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, attending this book event. I said in person or online. There are many people for me to thank. The editors at Ivy Tauris, the publisher, I had another great experience with them, the reviewers of the book, for a fantastic review of the book, and the other people who read some chapters of the book and benefited from the comments. I'd like to also thank the Middle East Centre and for organizing this event. So I'd like to thank Robert Nadine. So thank you very much for coming. First, I'm going to talk about the creation and foundations of the book, and then I will go through the chapters of the book, chapter by chapter. What you see on the screen is a map of Iran and Iran's administrative division. And this is Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan in the west of the country, subdivided into different provinces. And we should bear in mind that Kurdistan province is only one part of Iranian Kurdistan. But this subdivision of the region makes generating data and creating statistics very challenging. Still possible, but it's challenging. The book is the work of many years. I have published other articles and the topics covered in the book I have discussed them in recent publications. It fills a huge gap in the history of modern history of Iran and Kurdistan since 1979. It covers many themes: economy, society, culture, gender, civil society, interstate war, armed struggle, and so on and so forth, just to create a meaningful historical process since the 1979. There are studies and literature relevant to each topic. Instead of providing an exhaustive list of studies or theories and literature, the book engages with such studies and literature as it presents its argument. It treats history as a discipline. That's the book's historical approach. History is not merely storytelling. It's about asking significant questions and explain the significance of historical events and processes. The form of the book is a historical narrative from 1979, again, to have a history of that period, to understand what happened in each decade. The subtitle of the book, Change, Revolution, and Resistance, refers to three fundamental pillars of the book. Change, to identify the dynamics of change and transformation, the revolution as a major turning point in world history, and the resistance, the Kurdish political movement becoming a permanent part of history of Kurdistan since 1979. The book uses a wide range of primary sources, and for secondary literature, it relies on historical studies of modern Iran, post-revolutionary Iran, Iran in the 1990s and since 2000. The first chapter is a historical background to 1979. I may refer to that background a couple of times during my presentations. The second chapter is about how the revolution unfolded in Kurdistan and the Islamic Republic was founded. It briefly explains the root causes of the revolution. But I like to highlight revolutions and the question of legitimacy. When a state, a regime loses legitimacy, it cannot rely on brutal force and dictatorship forever. This is a familiar story. A couple of months ago, another dictator left his country suddenly. So this is what that brief explanation of the revolution highlights. I like to highlight, to explain the revolution from the perspectives of children. I'm not sure if you have written or read anything about children and revolution. If you have, please tell us. I'm interested. I tell you a personal story. In the city of Tauris, 1970, the revolution had started, and a group of boys aged between 10 and 13 or 14 one day gathered in our neighborhood. We gathered in a corner, and one of the boys had some papers in his hand, and he started going through the papers. I don't remember anything until he reached this point that philosophers have always interpreted the world. The point, however, is how to change it. The impact was huge. I have no name for that. I have never been able to describe the feeling that I had at that moment, but it was revolution and something great was happening. The first thing this group of boys changed was the name of their football team from Shahab Skyro to Siakar, a village in north of Iran where in 1970, the Fedayeen guerrillas, member of a newly emerged left-wing organization, attacked a military base to get this message across to Iranians that dictatorship won't last long. And you can imagine what happened to these boys when they came face to face with the famous image of Che Guevara. It was love at first sight. I haven't included this story in the book. The book instead makes more room for general stories of children and revolution. Children's literature played a pivotal role in shaping the minds of the young. And it was the books, children's story by likes of Samad Behrangi and Ali Ashraf Darwishan, told about child labor and a class-based society in a simple language that children could understand. But children's literature was part of a literary explosion that followed the 1979 revolution. 1 million book title was published within a year in Iran, including 2,000, translating 2,000 titles by Russian, British, American, Italian, and Russian writers. And make no mistake that Kurdish identity was part of the picture. People became familiarized with previous Kurdish political movements, revolutionaries, and Kurdish literature emerged, and cultural production from other parts of the Kurdistan poured into this part of Kurdistan, and children attended Kurdish language courses. The image of Mala Awara, a religious educated revolutionary who was captured and executed at the end of the 1960s, was no less charismatic than that of Che Guevara. The book then goes on to provide a detailed analysis of the important event between February and September 1979. It presents an overview of the political parties involved in the Kurdish political movement, and it tries to present a balanced analysis of all the parties involved and avoid being biased. The referendum for the Islamic Republic in April 1979, which was boycotted in Kurdistan. The emergence of civil society organization, Jam'iyat, the Association for Defending Revolution and Freedom in Kurdistan, city councils, peasants, workers, teachers, and students' union, and of course, women's councils, societies, and unions. These refer to new social and political forces politicized during the revolution. It was truly a period of unprecedented political participation, cultural revival, and intellectual engagement, which was interrupted by the military occupation of Kurdistan by the new regime. A significant event was Khomeini's decree of 28 Mordad, what is known among the Kurds on 19 August 1979. The decree in which Khomeini ordered the military, even the navy, Kurdistan in Iran doesn't have access to sea, to that Kurdistan based on bizarre claims. Cities were occupied, and the Sharia judge Khalkhali arrived in Kurdistan, according to the memoir of a pastor or member of the IRGC, with sacks of handcuffs. Many people were executed across Kurdistan, including in the city of Sana'a. What happened to those men, and what went through their minds in their last moment? A published book of memoir tells us that a night before, those 11 men and other prisoners were singing a beautiful song, Qalbi Min, or My Heart, the lyrics by Sami Awdal, a Kurdish poet born in the early 1900s, and the song was popularized by mesmerizing voice of Tahir Tawfiq. Why it is important, a relationship between history and literature, and that we have here this cliche that men and women make their own history in circumstances inherited from the past. But we can, I believe, add that they will never be able to do so without having at their disposal the literary treasure left by likes of Sami Awdal. Children of Sakis recorded their first encounter with the IRGC, the main occupying force, and their experience of the military occupation of Kurdistan. This was edited by Mansour Yaquti, a renowned Iranian of Kurdish descent, and published in probably winter 1980. The book says this document doesn't exist anymore. That's a mistake. This appeared only last month in Tehran. In November, the IRGC left Kurdistan. Khomeini sent a peace message because it had found, this regime had found itself in a crisis with the United States over the occupation of the American embassy. So Kurdistan, universities, and the left and other democratic forces could wait. The liberals succumbed to the pressures of the radicals and the leaders of the Islamic revolution, and they resigned from the provisional government one by one. One important achievement of the period was the formation of the Kurdish people delegation, representation delegation. The book explains how it was formed and negotiation with the new regime since April 1980. So you can find information about this delegation. Its 26-article plan for the autonomy of Kurdistan in December 1979 was a wise articulation of Kurdish demands for autonomy, which in many ways speaks to these days. A democratic experiment continued until the spring of 1980, when Kurdistan was reoccupied, this time permanently after weeks of resistance by people and Peshmerga forces. This followed the cultural revolution and marked the victory of the Islamic revolution over liberalism. The book argues the liberals should have known better. People had warned about what was coming. In July 1979, the weekly book of the Kitab-e-Jum'ah, Friday book, a weekly journal edited by the renowned poet Ahmad Shamlou, July 1979, only a few months after the revolution, warned that dark days were ahead. This is translated for the book, and so people knew what was coming only a few months after the revolution, but liberals decided to ignore such warning. I particularly like this part. We are now at the onset of a veil storm, and every cry is awareness raising. When Kurdistan was remilitarized, executions of men, but this time also women, took place, and Khalkhali returned. Mastura Shahsawari and Firishta Fayaqi were among the first women who were executed by the end of spring or early summer 1980. Two sisters by the names of Shahla, 32, and Nasreen, 27, who were nurses by professions, were executed in early September 1979. According to the Sharia Judge Khalkhali, they shouldn't have medically treated anti-revolutionaries, but the sisters had decided to stick to their profession, the principles of their profession, and treat everybody, including the members of the IRGC. There is evidence. Many years later, the book mentions a lady, Kamangar, Khamini Kamangar, whom I met a few years later, and I realized she was in prison at the same time and in the same prison. And realizing I was the sister's brother, she told me an amazing story that one of the members of the IRG's firing squad mocked or asked the older sister, Shahla, if she was scared because she had asked to be blindfolded, while the younger sister had refused to be blindfolded. She answered back that she didn't want to see her sister's death. In that moment, the younger also asked to be blindfolded. More women are listed in the book. Fazilat Darai, Narmin Karimi, Wahida Wahidi, who was only 16. Shu'la Ibrahimi, Shahla Chaman Arab, Fariba Farshi, Ma'sumay Sarhangi, Fakhri Shaydai, Susan Golensari, Farnoosh Vakilzada, Safia Muhammadi, and many more are listed in the book, and many more women who were tortured and spent years in prison. Some of these women managed to get letters out to their parents full of defiance. And I hope there are historians write about these women and about their stories. How shall we explain this madness, these executions of women, what was happening? I go back to the historical background and the ideological radicalization on the state level following the Second World War, the expansion of the prison system, the formation of women's political prison under the Pahlavi state. Yes, Khalkhali, and this was indeed not only something happening in Iran, it was a regional and international phenomena, this ideological radicalization and expansion of prison system. Yes, Khalkhali entered Kurdistan with sacks of handcuffs, but when he left, he had already entered Kurdish collective memory as evidence of evil. The 1980s then is a decade of war and armed struggle, the next chapter. And the chapter explains that when civil society ended, militarization started, Kurdish armed struggle became the most attractive form of resistance. The book describes and explains how it happened, the forces involved in the armed struggle, the casualties on both sides, and how it went on intensely, at least until the end of the decade. But it also explains what was the purpose of Kurdish armed struggle. It is an analysis of Kurdish armed struggle as a space for the survival of the Kurdish political movement. It presents a comparative analysis of Kurdish armed struggle with other types of armed struggle around the world, and argues for the correlation between militarization and armed struggle to say that armed struggle is not intrinsic to Kurdish political movement. The next important part of the chapter is about Iran-Iraq war, the root causes of the Iran-Iraq war, the discourse of holy defense of the Ta'im Muqaddas. And this basically the 1980s, I think you agree that it was about war and armed struggle. And we need more research, and I hope we see more research about armed struggle, Iran-Iraq war and its devastating impact on Kurdistan. The next chapter is a decade of ideological and organizational transformation. What I mean by that, and the context is the post-war reconstruction. The 1990s started in 1988. That was the motto of the decade. And these camps, reformists and fundamentalists, gradually took shape, as we know today. And the point of contention was within the Islamic Republic, the political order, the primacy of the rule of law or religion. The reformists argued for the primacy of the rule of law within the regime, and the fundamentalists for religion or vilayat faqih. The second for that, the 23rd May 1997, is probably the most significant political event in Iran. The reformist candidate Khatami was elected. It led to a controlled political opening, and the book explains the mechanism of reform in Kurdistan. Various organizations, genuine reformists and others, and democratic organizations like Human Rights Organization and Democracy for Iran organization set up by likes of Kabulwand. And the book mentions many journals, their editors persecuted, and moves on to explain the economic, cultural, and political consequences of reformism in Kurdistan. Economically, the economic development remained a characteristic of Kurdistan after 10 years of reforming. So roughly from the middle of the 1990s, you can see the low share of these lines of production in domestic gross national product in Kurdistan. So economic underdevelopment. Culturally, things were different. The book has many such tables, theatrical and musical performances increased notably, and local print publication, newspapers, 2 in 96, increased to 9 in 2011, with a circulation of over 2 million. Journals, 2003 in 2001, increased to 15 in 2011. Political consequences of the women for that is basically the Kurdish faction in the sixth Majlis. I have given some voices to the reformists. They were usually on the side of the reformists. They challenged the state security approach to Kurdistan, even the Orientalist approach visible in reformist publications, and importantly, the emergence or reshaping of different forms of Kurdish identity, geographical, transnational, or regional, and religious Kurdish identity. So you will find informations on reformism in Kurdistan and social and democratic changes to understand or see how basically teams changed. Between 96 and 2006, there were 12 million people migrated internally in Iran. This trend continued. Between 2011 and 16, 4 million people migrated internally and internationally. And the population of Iran reached 17 million in 2006, 17 million aged between 15 and 24. Why this is important? Because the young, that group of population became the backbone for the reformist movement and for the expansion of civil society organization. Regarding the Kurdish political party and political movement and armed struggle, proceeded by the early 1990s for many reasons. The book argues that armed struggle succeeded in its mission, that is, creating a space for the continuation of the Kurdish political movement. Regional factors, the end of the Iran-Iraq war, more military concentration of the regime on Kurdistan, and of course, factionalism inside the Kurdish political parties, which began to weaken their organization. And again, historical background, the book mentions somewhere that for this kind of chronic factionalism, disagreements and verbal, sometimes physical violence, when people split from an organization, we should pay attention to the revolutionary discourse or culture, again, taking shape after the Second World War, which the left in Iran inherited and reflected in such factionalism and disagreements. So many things seem to have happened after the Second World War. The next chapter is about civil society and expansion of civil society in Iran. This is probably the most important development in the last 20-25 years across Iran and also in Kurdistan. The book explains what it means by civil society, a social sphere independent from but engaging with political society, that's the state and political parties, a site of struggle and resistance, a catalyst for social and political change, and instrumental for fostering democratization and empowerment. Is it possible to do that in an authoritarian context when people are persecuted? Challenging. I mean, activists say it's very challenging, difficult, but they are willing, or the will is there to change society. The context for the expansion of civil society organization and movement, the political situation, past experiences, and the emergence of reformism. And there are other important factors: migration, internal and international, closer interaction with the outside world, demographic change, and of course the internet and the expansion of higher education institutions in Kurdistan, universities in Kurdistan. The book has many such tables. This one is civil society organization in the last 4 decades in Kurdistan province. between 2016, this is only the Kurdistan province, 130, there were 130 such organizations in 2021. Other societies and unions, literary societies, cultural, scientific, women's societies, workers' trade associations, teachers and student association. So by 2020 in Kurdistan, there are at least 26, for example, literary societies. So you can see the expansion of organization since early 2000. Environmental societies, here you see logos of many of them very important in the civil society movement in Kurdistan. Institutes of higher education in 2020 in Kurdistan province, at least there were 28 centers of higher education by 2020, and you can add if you add other centers of other universities in the Kurdish cities allocated to other provinces, so the number is higher. In any case, you can find a university or a branch of university in every Kurdish cities. Academic year 2019-20, 8,500 students graduated from a university in Kurdistan province. And as I said, the book has similar tables. University of Kurdistan, a very important university in Kurdistan. This is the Faculty of Language and Literature. Again, clash with security forces. They wiped off the name of the faculty in other languages, in Arabic, English, and Kurdish. And there is a literature module, at least in 2015 in Kurdish, and there is a Kurdish literature journal published by the University of Kurdistan. Publications in Kurdistan by 2022. In 1973, there was one journal in Kurdish. In 2022, in Kurdistan province, that's 104 publications, printed and online publications, 19 university journals only in the Kurdistan province. And of course, music training centers, many of them in each city, and play an important part, not only in preservation of Kurdish identity, but also in transforming Kurdish identity and bringing new ideas. Finally, the chapter is about the uprising of women life freedom. It doesn't describe the movement. We have sufficient information about how it happened, but first it has a discussion about ideas, how ideas become ideology and how they inspire social movement. They need favorable conditions, and it is fair to say that 4 decades of change and transformation, Kurdish political movement sacrifices, they paid off, and there was all that reflected in the uprising of women life freedom. What distinguishes this uprising from previous movement, like the Green Movement or political and economic unrest in previous years? It is distinguished from them because of the return of the revolutionary discourse and the defeat of the reformist discourse in Iran. It means a crisis of legitimacy, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. So the uprising has created a crisis of legitimacy for the regime, and the regime doesn't seem to be able to reverse this trend. So the chapter is about these points, and I seem to have this conclusion. The short conclusion about writing Kurdish history in Iran. Again, I said at the beginning, history as a discipline. This is an example of writing Kurdish history in Iran. And it is important to get the approach, the methodology right, and do more research on the history of this period. And this work is only one history of that period. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to the Center at LSE and also especially to Robert and Nadine for inviting me to speak here today. It's a privilege as well as a pleasure for me to comment on this book, which I had the chance to read during the production as well as after production. I want to also congratulate Marouf for the book. I think it's an extremely important book. In fact, quite unique in many ways in the Kurdish studies, and also very long overdue. So it's a very valuable addition to Kurdish studies as a field. Before delivering my remarks, I want to say something about my subject position. I'm a male Kurdish academic based in a Western institution, and this brings also advantages but also liabilities which have bearings on what I say or think about a book like this. There is another thing about my subject position, and that is, like Marouf, although I think I'm a slightly younger than you, Marouf, but I have literally lived through the 5th chapter of this book. And it was extremely engaging and touching for me to read this book. And listening to Marouf, actually, there was quite interesting parallels. He mentioned this football team called Syria and named after this quite iconic place in Iran, which was the beginning of armed struggle against the Shah regime in the 60s and 70s. So a couple of years after revolution, me and my friends created a football team, and we named it Struggle Chabad. And we literally struggled in each game. We hardly ever won, but it was very interesting, actually, experience. Anyways, so I want to say a few things about why I think this book is really important. And I want to conclude by a couple of points in terms of future direction the book charts, but also some questions which hopefully allows Marouf to comment more on the significance of the book, which is not always explicit. So I think this book is, what is it doing? It's sketching a very empirically rich and historically grounded account of quite divergent pattern of political development in Kurdistan as opposed to, or in contrast to the rest of Iran from 79 onwards. Of course, the two parts are interactive and shaping each other, but anyone who reads this book or has knowledge about modern Iranian history would note that Kurdistan was standing out in its early resistance to the Islamic Republic, to rapid development of democratic practices and institutions, and its, in many ways, heroic resistance against an extremely repressive and brutal regime when everybody else, more or less, apart from small parts of radical left in Iran, had either been co-opted by the Islamic Republic or repressed, physically exterminated in many cases. So the book actually, I think, is quite unique in providing a political economy, if you like, of post-revolutionary Kurdistan in Iran. It's much more focused on, if you like, a materialist history of this period, focusing on social and economic developments, not simply ideas and culture and so on, which is quite common in many branches of area studies, including Kurdish studies. And I think probably very importantly, the book poses a fundamental challenge to mainstream Iranian historiography, which is thoroughly, not all of it, obviously, there are always great works by Iranian scholars, but generally Iranian historiography is imbued by Iranian nationalism as an ideology and discourse. And in this ideology, there is a lot of arguably colonial epistemological elements residing in the way in which the story of modern Iran is said. So in this kind of historiography, everything obviously revolves around a Persian-dominated center, to which then other parts of Iran seem to be contributing to animate and otherwise kind of independent dynamics. As a result, Kurdistan or other parts of Iran, the subaltern peoples of Iran, are hardly ever mentioned as distinctive historical agents at their own right. So they are always subsumed under this nationalist account of Iranian history. And in that sense, it bears a lot of resemblance to various forms of colonial historiography in relation to Western colonialism and non-Western world. So in that sense, the book actually challenges this. It shows the distinctive operation and contribution and innovations of Kurdish movement in Iran over that particular period. But I think the book also is quite, offers a critical contribution to Kurdish studies, because within Kurdish studies as well, Iranian Kurdistan or Eastern Kurdistan or Rojhelat is neglected for various reasons. And the main one being, since early 80s at least, for various geopolitical and international reasons, Eastern Kurdistan has been less visible internationally. So you had the first Gulf War, the formation of KRG in Iraqi Kurdistan. You have Turkey as a member of NATO and aspirant applicant to European Union, and obviously Syrian civil war. All of this have helped for Kurdistan in those parts to be much more visible in international media and coverage, and by implication in academic studies of Kurdistan, whereas we don't have comparable dynamics for Iranian Kurdistan. I think the kind of history which Marouf provides us with is also challenging more critical strands of historiography, but also sociology, various fields of social sciences, because within the broadly post-colonial and Marxist historiography, for different reasons, Kurdish movement is often neglected. So for the unreconstructed Orthodox Marxists, everything is about class. For post-colonialists, is everything about the West. So if you happen to be fighting against a state which is fighting the West, you are bound to be neglected. And that's happened for Iranian Kurdistan, given that it's opposing an Islamic republic. So in that sense, I think the book not only contributes to the Kurdish studies, but also contributing to, my colleagues in the UK universities are engaging with the decolonizing academia project or agenda. And I think in that sense, there is a lot to be said about the book. And finally, I think the book is extremely rich empirically. And as someone who have been reading about this stuff, I think this book becomes sort of a reference book, really, because the amount of empirical data and historical information you get here is quite significant and extremely useful for anyone who wants to do research on Iranian history, or especially Kurdish history in Iran. So I think I'm bound by my capacity as discussant to say a couple of critical points as well, just to kick off the discussion. So I wonder, Marouf, if you could say more once we have the discussion starting about the way in which you think you are challenging the field of Iranian studies as a branch of area studies. And I'm asking that because you correctly, on page 200 and elsewhere in the book, you say, you describe this, Iranian nationalism's mythology about Iran being this kind of primordial society extending across millennia, having always this kind of unity of identity and so on. And of course, this is, it's all myth, as we know. But every nationalist has its own myth. I mean, at the moment you're talking about Iranian nationalism. But I wonder if you could say more as to, do you think your challenge being simply or primarily a empirical one, that is to say, you tell the Iranian studies as a field that, look, guys, there is stuff happening here you are neglecting. You know, this guy, Abbas Amanat, a prominent professor of Iranian studies, Marouf mentions in his book, he has a book of 900 pages of Iranian history. There's hardly 7 references to Kurdistan. And it's just remarkable that you can simply, you know, write off such history in a book of history, for example. So I want you to encourage you to say more and not be so humble about the book, and tell us how it really challenges that field. And the second and final point I wanted to make is about something with which I started, right? I said Kurdistan stood out compared to the rest of Iran in the post-revolutionary period in terms of its political opposition to the Islamic Republic. And I wonder what you think about the obvious question as to why, and by all the data you have provided, and anybody from Iran would know just by experience that Kurdistan is one of the most underdeveloped, in fact, you could say de-developed parts of Iran. It's extremely militarized, it's securitized, its repression is endemic. It has witnessed at least 2 wars, as you mentioned, between the Kurdish parties and the regime, as well as the Iran-Iraq war. And yet, Kurdistan has been home to the most radical democratic movement that I would argue modern Iran has ever witnessed, which has culminated in Jinjian Azadi movement, the women life freedom. So I think for anyone working within, you know, conventional mainstream social sciences, this raises an important question. How an underdeveloped, repressed society can be so politically advanced and radical and vanguard, in fact, for a movement like women life freedom. And I think there's lots of material in the book to explain why this, if you like, divergent path. But I hope you tell us more about it. Sorry for going over time. Thank you very much.
Extremely helpful, wonderful to have your contribution and comments. And thank you, Marouf. Many thanks indeed for your wonderful presentation, and many congratulations on your incredibly impressive, groundbreaking book. Let us move to questions and comments. We'll hold Cameron's 2 questions. You can think about those while we just do some little housekeeping. If you're online, start with people online. Please post a question in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Just write it in the Q&A box. I will find it there and then pass that on in person here. And if you're in the room, please raise your hand. I will find you, and we'll get around as many as we can before we close the event. Thank you so much. We have a couple already coming in. So let's start first, Marouf, with Cameron's 2.
Maybe I have spoken enough. Maybe we should start from the.
Well, let's take them. Why don't you just take them? Do the historiography in Iran studies and the de-development. Just knock them all quickly, and then we'll go around.
Very quickly. Yes,
They're
thank you very much for your contribution. Encouraging comments about the book. Thank you very much. Yes, the problem with Iranian historiography, this is actually the subject I'm working on, and hopefully I finish. And I write an article, so I'm working on that. It's not only that it's not empirical. I mean, it's not that Iranian historiography, like you say, the mainstream Iranian historiography, modern Iranian historiography. It's not that they don't engage, or there isn't enough sources, or that most Iranian historians speak Persian and all sources must be in Kurdish, or so they don't understand the sources. That's not that. I think the problem is what I call is the approach, is methodological. Basically, there is a mainstream Iranian historiography which regards histories of other parts of Iran, Kurdistan, Khuzestan, Azerbaijan, more local, more relevant to the people living in that region. That's not relevant to all Iranians. It's like political history. Iranian historiography is concerned with the state, political history, prominent Iranian figures, and it relies on a fixed chronology, like constitutional revolution coming up with that, then Second World War, and if there were Azerbaijan and Kurdistan Republic, they were Ghaila or riots, and then they move on to Mossadegh and then Iranian Revolution. So it's about approach. It's about approach. It's not, and it's interesting to know that the primary sources of the book, almost 99% is in Persian. So no excuse that there is that historians cannot read Kurdish. 99% is in Persian. So we can talk about that more, but that's briefly what I can say about that. And then Iranian historiography basically it gives the impression it's about Persia, not Iran, if you know what I mean. Development, underdevelopment, or de-development. I prefer to say economic underdevelopment, meaning this is what characterizes Kurdistan. De-development, I'm sure you agree that is a more deliberate action by a state to develop a region. Probably, I mean, researchers can use that, providing they have enough evidence and tell us that this is de-development. That's how I understand de-development. But so you can use that. I mean, but what I meant by economic underdevelopment is that the low share of the region in many lines of production, and something I couldn't mention, or I forgot, or I didn't have enough time. The impoverishment of the Kurdish working class. This is something when we reach to the end of the 1990s. One aspect of that is the cross-border trade of coalberry. That's not the whole picture, but an important part of the picture. So I still go for underdevelopment, but I'm fine with a researcher who thinks we should use also describe the situation, the economic situation of Kurdistan as de-developed, and providing they have evidence.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from our audience. We have a few coming in, and we don't have terribly long, so please keep your questions or comments pretty short. And we'll start there. The first one is there, and then we'll go here, and then to you. We'll take those three to start. Further back on the right there. 1, 2, 3. We'll take those three together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nidal, and I'm a research officer at the Middle East Center. Thank you, Marouf, and thanks, Cameron. This is a fantastic presentation of your book, Marouf. I have 2 quick questions, but first I wanted to add to Cameron's comment about why I think this book is also, it adds a lot of value to the Iranian studies as a discipline, because it kind of centers the Kurdish perspective and story within this field that has been historically marginalized, and I believe is still marginalized. My first question is whether you think there has been historically a difference in the relationship with the revolution and the reformists between Shia Kurds and Sunni Kurds, because this is not something that we really hear about or read about much in the literature. And the second question is, you mentioned the Orientalist approach towards the Kurds in Kurdistan, Iran. Was it by the reformists particularly, or was it generally by the state? And how would you explain that? Thank you.
Can you repeat the last question?
You mentioned in chapter 4 the Orientalist approach towards the Kurds. Can you please explain a little bit? Thank you.
I guess hold those. We'll take a couple more here and bundle them together. Just in front.
Yeah, thanks very much for your book. Obviously, very useful. Lots of information. Just I have 2 questions. One of them you say Iranian Kurdistan. Obviously, we know, but it is located in of the Iran, but Kurdistan is occupied. I think that should also highlight in your book. And when the river is really located other government of the Iran rather than part of the Kurdistan being occupied actually by Iran. That's one question. The second question, as Cameron mentioned, that Iranian Kurdistan or West Kurdistan being not the highland in Western. Maybe the reason is that civil contract and Lausanne, because the other two parts was pretty much divided by that agreement, and East Kurdistan was not in that agreement. Maybe that is the reason. But my point is that I think that is maybe make East Kurdistan not been highlighted in West because they didn't be involved with divided. But I think that is also make the Kurdish people in Iran, well, East Kurdish people, themselves being like isolated by the lecture in Iran. We don't make a difference between real Kurdish being occupied rather than actually being part of the Iran. So if you explain on that.
Thank you very much. And then just next to you, if you could introduce yourself, it'd be very helpful.
Thank you. My name is Asa. Fantastic and Mamosta for your book, and Mamosta Cameron also for your short talk as well afterwards. My question, sorry, it's a bit convoluted the way I've written it. I'm trying to explain something that is kind of hard for me to express. We're fed a narrative that asserts and supports nation-state ideology, despite the fact that nation-states were not geographically and sociologically incorporated until the early 1900s. The consequence is that I think spaces in terms of these borders, but communities and societies do not conform to these artificial borders. As Cameron mentioned, as you mentioned, one of the problems is that we think of Iran as a space, and then the Kurds and the other ethnic groups sort of participate in the space of Iran, rather than them being independent spaces with separate, I don't know, religions, cultures, ethnicities, ways of life. And it is disturbing for me, the amount of books I pick up in Waterstones, Foils, places like that, when I look at the bibliography, and they refer to spaces as Iraq 1,000 years ago, or Iran 1,000 years ago. When it didn't exist, Iraq was 3 separate wilayats. And this distorts our perception of history significantly. And what I want to understand, I wish I'd read your book before I'd come here, but I want to understand is, does your text explore Kurdistan as a space, as in all 4 parts of Kurdistan, and how the woman life freedom movement migrated from northern Kurdistan to western Kurdistan and arrived in eastern Kurdistan and then spread to Iran? Or does it just refer to Kurdistan again in that general narrative of it being participating to the history of Iran? Because it is important that we recognize the Kurds participate enormously to the philosophical ideologies that develop in that region. And it's important for us because we need to have an understanding of how our societies develop. If we don't know how our societies develop, then we can't navigate our societies towards a better future.
Yeah, about the reformists arguing that they challenge the state's Orientalist approach, the Orientalist approach in reformist publications. I mean, that's one point. Prominent reformist figures in Kurdistan. There is this guy Khalid Tabakuli, who basically genuine reformist and persecuted a couple of times. He argues that, and they, he explained that this is something that they challenge because, well, the Orientalist approach to the Kurds, as Orientalists described, the Kurds as according to the Orientalist approach. So that was only part of basically like engagement, intellectual engagement with other reformist organizations and figures across Iran. And the reformists in Kurdistan tried to shape a better understanding of Kurdistan, Kurdish identity, and its history. About that, why Iranian Kurdistan, why not Eastern Kurdistan, and the space, Iran as a space, or how should we deal with these artificial borders and this history? I mean, I don't have anything against that, what you say, but in the introduction of the book, I explained, I mean, why I use Iranian Kurdistan, but I understand that other cardinal directions, Rojava, Bashur, Bakur, and Rojava are increasingly used by people. Iranian Kurdistan is not only the name of a geography, it's a discourse. That it can be a discourse, meaning that this part of Iran is mine, basically a discourse of a political discourse. And this concept of Rojava is a resistance against such political. So it is welcome, you know, that resisting is the political discourse that Kurdistan has an independent history, independent existence. That's very welcome. But Rojava and other concepts, I explain in the book that they have the capacity to become a political discourse themselves. So we should be aware of that, not to create imaginary lines and end up in stereotyping and categorizing, you know, people. We should be aware of this point. We can use Rojava or Iranian Kurdistan, a researcher or anybody can use ISA, but I think we should explain why I use Rojava, okay? And Iran as a space, you know, Iran is an important category of analysis. You cannot arbitrarily dismiss Iran, you know, because what's happening, what has happened, at least for the last century in Iranian Kurdistan or Rojava, it has been happening in the context of Iran. And in the last 100 years, basically, we should pay attention to commonalities, you know, cultural, socioeconomic, political interactions and connections of all the societies and regions in Iran with each other. So my point is, you should be aware of these geographical designations and be careful not to forget such historical common histories and basically the importance of the context of Iran. Yes, this movement started from Kurdistan. You know, the Kurdistan benefits from a history of strong Kurdish political movement. It has resources. So, you know, people in other parts of Iran, more central regions, they don't benefit from such resources. I mean, these and many other factors are factors we should pay attention to when we basically make statements or claim about what distinguishes Iranian Kurdistan and Kurdistan from other parts of Iran. The Kurdish political movement, in my view, it hasn't been ethnocentric, meaning that it has valued always universal ideas, and it is very welcome. Sad events, of course, that girls in other parts of Iran, they are ready to face bullying for Kurdistan. I mean, that's how I see things. Yeah, that's enough for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Marouf. We'll take, we have been given 5 more minutes kindly by Nadine, I think, so we'll squeeze a little bit over. We have a couple of points online I'll just take, and then we'll take the last few in the room who've already had their hands up. I'm afraid we won't take any more because we are running out of time. I will just read the online 2 questions. Actually, one of them was about the terminology for Iranian Kurdistan, which you have covered. The other question from Hushang is, given Iran's shifting alliances and internal crises, is Kurdish resistance evolving into a transnational struggle, or is it increasingly restrained by Iran's security apparatus and geopolitical realities?
Yes,
Quickly say that.
the movement has become, the Kurdish political movement has become more transnational, trans-regional. I mean, if the question means other parts of Greater Kurdistan.
So, yeah.
Yes, I mean, that's a development, I'm not sure if I mentioned, regarding the Kurdish political movement, the armed struggle during the 1990s. One development was the emergence of new political organizations, which the book covers in the end of the 1990s and early 2000, and these basically more interactions with other parts of Greater Kurdistan. This interaction always was there. We have a book about that written by Alan, and before the revolution and after the revolution, there was always this trans-regional relationship with other part of Kurdistan, but it has, yes, become increasingly trans-regional and has shaped Kurdish identity and trans-regional Kurdish identity. Some people prefer to use to define themselves in the geography of the Greater Kurdistan.
Thank you. We'll take there are 4 questions I already have. We'll take those 4. Please be very brief. Just one question.
I will be, and thank you. It's amazing. I mean, contributions. I'm happy to be part of that conversation. My question is, I have many, but it's specifically about how those Kurdish political movements in Iran kind of use the concept of colonialism, the Iranian colonialism. In that, is there any kind of phrasal like that? Because I think it's the very core of the situation right now that we're talking, and just a kind of a little in response to the comment that Zoom from the online has already been a transnational, national and transregional movements we have. This is a very kind of an absurd question in a way. These are the kind of movements are circulating all around between crossing the borders already, being all of them, not just one. Just kind of
Thank you.
a little.
And just behind the next one. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Puya, graduate of Kurdish Studies from Exeter University and an analyst of Middle East at SRM, Cybersecurity Intelligence Company. Just want to small comment on the second critique of Dr. Mateen and how an underdeveloped place like Kurdistan become a stronghold of resistance during Xinjiang Azadi movement. And I've tried to answer this question in my master's dissertation, and my answer was the collective memory of resistance in Kurdistan. And I mean, the wider meaning of the collective memory of resistance, which you can find in urban spaces and in the family growing up in Kurdistan. It is almost impossible to not hearing stories from family members who become martyr. I have like family members become martyrs, nurse, former Peshmerga, and just growing on a city like Mahabad, celebrating events like Dura Bandan, celebrating the anniversary of assassination of leaders like Dr. Sharaf Kandi, Qasim Lou, and resistance is indispensable part of growing up as someone in Kurdistan. So maybe it is underdeveloped, but in like speaking of material, but we have all the knowledge and oral story of the past. Thank you.
In the very back there. Thank you. Please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Marouf, for your book. I really wanted to read as soon as possible. The quick question was about what do you think about the future of Eastern Kurdistan? I prefer to say Rojava, because at the moment we are having lots of complication with the Shah regime supporter. And we have seen during the Xinjiang Azadi movements that unfortunately they were trying to erase the language or the phrases such as Jina. They tried to make it Mahsas by force. And another thing also, I would like to add another comment about the title of the book, however you explained. But the Iranian Kurdistan, really, I think the majority of people can't accept it in, especially in Eastern Kurdistan, because we can't be Iranian the Iran, as you mentioned, the name is not really historically, it was Persia, and they are trying to force lots of nations into a fake geography like Baluch, like Kurds, like Arabs, and they are trying to make the country, and even they can't accept us as a nation. So that's why I think it's much better to say Eastern Kurdistan, as we are saying Rojhelat. And personally, when someone asks me as a student where I'm from, I always say Kurdistan. If they can't understand, I say Rojhelat, and still I will say the part of Kurdistan which is occupied by Iran. That's what I prefer. Thank you so much, everyone.
One final very quick question. I'm sorry to those of you who've not had the chance, but I'm sure Marouf may be happy at the end to talk to you if you want. Or the last one just here in the front, please. Just there, yes, thank you. Just very quickly, please, and then we'll close.
Thank you. I'm a Tawfiq Ali. I'm regular here. And as usual, I normally write a review. I translate the event, your publicity. I've already done that into Arabic. And what the publisher has on the online, on the book, I've done that. But I need a bit more, especially on the contents of introduction and conclusion. If I can get it online, I can read it. I can't copy and paste it. At my age, I haven't got the energy to do that. I copy it, put it on a online dictionary, translate it to Arabic or Kurdish, and then paste it, edit it, spell check it, and so on. So could you do that for me as an honor? On the question, and thank you for the presentation and congratulations on the book and on the organizations of this event. I particularly liked, as you know, some of you know, you're calling it Iranian Kurdistan, or Kurdistan of Iran. As a linguist, I'm very annoyed when they use these terms, and your words in response to the previous speakers about the subjects sounded like music to my ears. I particularly thank you for that.
Yes, again, terms colonialism, internal colonialism, or what? These are terms again used by some researchers. My point is, when you do research, you need a conceptual framework, as they say, you know, what theories, what ideas you use, what's your approach. You know, researchers can use internal colonialism, you know, as long as they have enough evidence to show that. But in my view, it shouldn't be the only framework of analysis. You should leave that framework open for other ideas, other approaches. So no problem, people can use that. And during the Jina or Mahsa uprising, the Jina uprising, and about the name Jina or Mahsa, the book in that chapter regarding the uprising says that when Jina wanted to register his name, the colonial approach of the state didn't allow that, and the death of Jina created a crisis of legitimacy for that colonial state. So colonial method, yes. I mean, myself, I have used that administrative divisions, and in culture, cinema, literature, you can see and observe that colonial approach to Kurdistan. Internal colonialism is another topic, and I can talk about that, but I know it's not. Again, I'm working on something on that, but my point is it shouldn't be the only framework of analysis. Iran or Persia, yes, again, nation or ethnic community, you know, Persian nationalist discourse, these are battlegrounds between historical national narratives, you know, fighting over nation or ethnic community. But what I want to say is I'm a historian, and researchers should be responsible about what they are writing. They are not necessarily political or cultural activists, and that's why I basically I emphasize on this point that whatever term we use, we need to explain that, and we should be wary of making our ideas to another political discourse to suppress something else. And thank you very much for the Tawfiq, like, as always, very kind, and I see what I can do about that. There are more questions.
Someone has a few remarks.
Yeah, maybe very quickly. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of them. I will be very selective. The Orientalism, I don't remember which part of the book you're referring to, but more generally, the approach of Iranian state and its elite intellectuals is Orientalist in the sense that they operate a cultural hierarchy within Iran. So the Kurds, the Baluch, the non-Persian peoples are described as ethnics or qawms, which are subordinate to the nation. And therefore, the entire historiography is based on this hierarchy, which is obviously epistemological as much as it is political. In terms of these space and nation state and artificial borders and so on, all borders are artificial. There is no natural border. Borders are politically constructed. And moreover, identities are not self-sufficient. They're always interactive. And who you do interact with is partly defines your identity. That's why Kurdish movement in different parts of Kurdistan has different focus, right? So Bakur does a particular kind of struggle and Rojava does differently. So in that sense, the division in Kurdistan is simultaneously inhibiting because it doesn't allow the aggregation of Kurdish political energy, but simultaneously it enriches it because each of these movements are subject to different nation state kind of political economy and different kind of forms of assimilation and struggle and so on. So yeah, there are no natural borders. And finally, colonialism. I mean, Marouf said there are people who use the notion of internal colonialism, with which I have taken issue because I think it doesn't quite explain the international dynamics of it. I'm developing, have written something on what I describe as inter-subaltern colonialism, which is basically about how the formation of nation state involves simultaneous denial of collective self-determination to particular peoples, because those states themselves are subalternized within global order because of the particular nature of capitalist world order. So there is simultaneously, you have nation states which vis-a-vis the ruling powers of the world are subalternized, but they simultaneously practice colonialism vis-a-vis their internal people. So there is this international, if you like, national dynamics. But primarily, I think my own argument about that is how post-colonial studies as a field is implicitly Eurocentric in the sense that it defines the category of colonialism in relation to Western colonialism, not in relation to non-Western practices of colonialism, which is sort of practiced against or committed against non-Western people. So I'll stop there.
Fascinating point to conclude. Sadly, we are out of time. I'm sorry to those of you who've not managed to get a question in, but I'm sure you can follow up with Marouf Cabi directly if you wish. Very kindly genial characters. If you enjoyed this event, please come back for more Middle East Centre events. There are lots of them. If you like Kurdish studies, do come to our annual conference, which will run for 3 days in mid-June. You're all very welcome to take part as national delegates. Yes. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to those of you who joined us online.